how we talk to ourselves, about how we talk to others, determines our destiny. When we focus on love, not fear, intentionally in our own brain, it releases a completely different chemical response. When we don't acknowledge the thing that's happening in a room that we're all experiencing, we break trust with our audience. If you skip your warm-up, the only person you're sabotaging is you and everybody you're talking to.
We're not giving ourselves permission to speak in order to simply grow, but to actually capitalize on opportunity, to optimize every opportunity that we have put right in front of us. Hello there, it's me, Steve Mellor, and welcome in to Growth Ready, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high-performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. We welcome in Samara Bay to the show, and as a public speaking and leadership advisor, Samara wants us all to grant ourselves permission to simply speak.
The different functions of speaking and communicating range based on what you want. Some of the audacious advice around giving ourselves permission to speak works in some contexts and not in others.
Samara helps us appreciate the collaborative potential that our body and mind has to establish the power that is required for us to grow into our greatest selves and to ready those around us to do the same. Hey guys, as we get started here with the episode, I want to just take 1 minute of your time to make a request for you to subscribe and rate the show. For our show to be easily discovered by other potential listeners, we need our current listeners, that's you, to take the time to not only subscribe, but to also rate the show. Whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, whatever platform of choice, there are typically ways to be rating the show. So go ahead and click something like that 5th star and be sure to take that additional time to leave a comment or two about why it is you enjoyed listening to the Growth Ready podcast. Your efforts on this will allow our show to be more discoverable, which means we're going to find more listeners and continue to have that significant impact on the community of human performance and personal development that I know you are all benefiting from by being listeners to this show. Please go ahead, take the time, subscribe, rate the show today. Hey, and while you're at it, why don't you share it with a few people as well? I appreciate you guys. Let's get to the interview. Hello there and welcome into the most recent installment of the Growth Ready podcast. I am delighted to be welcoming in Samara Bay to the show. And Samara, we are going to be really going down this path of communication, I have no doubt, with the work that you do. But before I start anticipating where we're going to go, how wrong of me to do so before actually asking the question that I have to ask everybody before we get started to have you answer. Samara Bay, what does it mean to you to be growth ready?
I am delighted by this question because I think it's like intrinsically a paradox. Here's what I mean. I think readiness is a different thing in our body than it is in our mind. And when we're mind ready, which is, by the way, like nearly an impossible state, it triggers all of our perfectionism, dare I say, and we're not actually in a position of growth. So readiness is a body thing. If I follow this logic I'm kind of teasing out in real time. And then the question is, how do we be ready in our body to grow? And I think the answer is sort of a lifelong experiment for each of us, because it turns out we each have different bodies with different histories and different, tight spots and different traumas, all of the things. And readiness has to do with, perhaps, I'm offering this because I end up offering this to all my clients and it feels like a heavy lift up top and then an obvious thing thereafter. Something like a warm up. And we might call it a ritual, or we might call it, pre-gaming.
Yeah.
But something like a warm up that makes our spine twist a bit and come alive, that makes our gut feel like it comes online so we actually can sense what we might like and not like and feel like is in alignment with our values and out of alignment, that gets our body generally feeling like it's, I like to use the word wiggly, a little wiggle, a little playfulness. And all of these things, which obviously our brain, our head is part of our body, but it is not, the over-indexed part that we sometimes accidentally do, makes us ready and ready for the unknown, which really is where growth comes from.
That's right. That's right. I think if you just answered that, if I'd asked that question, you just said wiggly, I would have been like, what a fantastic answer to the question. If you just said, what does it mean to be growth ready? Wiggly. And
I love that. I have a dear friend who's one of those, sort of entrepreneur colleagues you find along the way, and you keep them close because we're not building the business together, but we're sort of co-building our separate businesses. And she's the one who's like, you always use the word wiggle. And
yeah. I love it.
Oh, and then I just did my first ever TEDx, and I had to just like, little Easter egg for myself, throw in the word wiggle at some point, even though one might not expect that from a TEDx talk.
I love it. So I love the paradox, as you put it, and this idea that from a readiness standpoint, and you went to readiness first, which is always fun for me. It's like we get drawn by the first word so often of growth, and you went to the readiness and circled it back around to the growth. And I love this idea of how do we start to consider both the physical, the body's role in readiness, and the mind, and how the two coexist, complement one another, hurt each other, get in the way of one another, all this kind of thing, which immediately brings me to the sheer art form that you are an expert in, which is that of communication. I can't help but want to go there, because for me, so much of what you're alluding to here, Samara, is that of how do we communicate with ourselves? How, like our body is, what you're saying is our body's talking to us in those moments. Our body is talking to us, our mind is talking to us, and we're having to process in real time, okay, what does this tell me about the level of readiness that I have? And so in your world, tell us a little bit about, firstly, let's get a little bit more context. Tell us a little bit more about the world that you operate in. And then I really want to explore this idea of maybe how we communicate with ourselves before we start getting too far down this rabbit hole of how we may communicate with others.
Absolutely. I love that question. It's something that I think about all day, every day. So yes. Yes. In 2018, which is now quite a while ago, I had this real crossroads of a summer that totally changed the trajectory of my life and led to, I think, the sort of context question that you're asking about led to a real aha. I was a dialect coach in Hollywood for many years. I have an MFA in acting. I got swept up in the New York theater scene with dialect coaching with these two incredible mentors who dialect coach all of the Broadway shows. And there's not that many of us in the world who do this dialect thing. Sure. You may never have heard one speak to you before now, right? But I was really recognized by these two incredible mentors, and they started throwing me clients before I felt ready. And lo and behold, I really had an aptitude towards it, because it's not just sounds, although there is a real sort of nerdy science to it. There's an international phonetic alphabet, which you can think a little bit of like reading music, where there's sort of music theory to know. And then at the other side of it is this art form that is music. So there's some of the science, but the main part of dialect coaching is here you are with another human in front of you working on something different with how they show up in the world. And how do you create a safe enough space and a creative enough space and a juicy enough, environment for them to play, find something new, show up as a different person. In this case with, once I got to Hollywood, a camera inches from their face, judging how authentically they show up. So dialect coaching had the sort of, sounds and the really profound research on sort of subcultures of the world that we wanted to get right. And also this other thing, which is how humans do fresh new things in a way that feels integrated in their body. And so in a way, I was more prepared than I thought I was. But summer of 2018, I was coaching Gal Gadot on Wonder Woman 2. It was a summer in DC. And I got this call, one of those organizations that helps candidates for office had gotten my name and wondered if I'd be willing, totally pro bono, to just jump in and coach all these first-time candidates for the 2018 midterms. And I was so intrigued, and I'd never really done this. But I thought, well, if they spend an hour with me over Zoom, I'm not going to make them worse. So I dove in and did it.
Yeah,
right? Say that again?
That's it. It's one way to look at it. I love it.
It's one way. I mean, right. This is how we talk to ourselves.
Right.
And coaching those candidates changed my life. I realized that although each one of them was totally unique and there was so much diversity from around the country and age and gender and race, nonetheless, there were extremely consistent universal themes that were coming up when they were confronting, as I put it, going public for the first time. Switching from being, a citizen to being the person up on the stage that everybody is judging, having opinions about, literally deciding whether or not to trust and vote for. Mm-hmm. And I realized from that era, it was that summer of 2018 into the fall, that how we talk to ourselves, about how we talk to others, I mean, not to be overdramatic, but determines our destiny.
Yeah. I mean, before I let you go any further, like the comment of going public, immediately my mind was just like, aren't we all doing that?
Yeah.
Aren't we all going public in our own way, in our own world?
Well, and more now than ever before, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's this, like, as we speak, there is this meme going around of everybody, like, feeling nostalgic towards the 90s. And I saw this incredible note that was like, isn't it so interesting how we're all here on social media feeling nostalgic about the 90s, the time before social media?
Right.
But indeed, I mean, one of the benefits and drawbacks of social media is that we all have a public platform were we to want to take advantage of it. And then the question is how? And that can be a personal branding conversation that we have around, entrepreneurship and business, but it can also, if we just strip it back and just go for the human side for a second, it's also just a how. How do we go from being a private person to a public person? What does that distinction between private and public even mean anymore? For all of us who, as you and I are right now, having a conversation from our homes, which is nonetheless a public conversation, right? This is what we all sort of got thrown into during the pandemic, if not before.
Yep.
So I'm so curious about what this is to sort of scale up ourselves and all of the inner voices, and then what we do, what we lovingly do when we hear those voices.
So I think the moment that you phrase it as scaling up ourselves, it helps our listeners immediately reframe the sheer task of learning how to speak to oneself. Because in the world that I do as an executive coach, one of my easiest ways to explain what I do, I'm an executive coach. So what exactly do you do? Simply put, I help people get out of their own way. It's pretty much what I tell people. And like, oh yeah, I need help with that. It's like, yeah, everyone does. Everyone does. Everyone does. But that's not how this works. It's not how this works. But the point is, it's like when you say we're trying to scale ourselves up, suddenly now there's this purpose to the exploration of self-talk, of how we communicate with ourselves, as opposed to, I need to talk to myself better. It's like, yeah, but to result in what? Like, what do we want the result to be of this enhanced, improved version of how we communicate with ourselves? I get to speak from my own experience of that, whether it be through my therapy, whether it be through my profession and my transition changes over the years, whether it be on a relational level with my own wife. Like, these are the things that I have said, because I want to level up, let's say, how I communicate as a husband, it puts that little extra weight on the work itself. And I would love just to get from your perspective, like, are we putting enough weight on this work? Because I can't help but feel like maybe we're not. And I don't want to speak for you, but the way I look at it, I feel as though maybe it puts me in the minority. But I'd love for you to help me better understand what that might be.
I'm just playing here because I love everything. Let's find out. But my feeling when you say that is that actually I do think that many of us, and certainly your listeners, hello listeners, are thinking about legacy, are thinking about impact. But maybe per what you just said, there is a little bit of a missing link. That sometimes we consider this inner work, how we talk to ourselves, what kind of a readiness ritual we might have so that we really show up in the moments we show up. We think of it as a little side gig. It's a nice to have, not a must have.
Yes.
And if we link it better, you and I, and those of us who are in a position to, help folks with this kind of scaling, if we link it better to, that's actually how we steward our legacy. That legacy that we want to leave behind when we die, the impact we want to have in the world, the dent we want to have on the universe, right? These really lofty, profound, ambitious goals we have to do justice to our ideas and turn them into things. All of this that we can really connect to, it is done in the daily work of how we talk to ourselves and how we move our bodies.
Right.
And it's almost so, simple that it feels like that. Surely that's not it. I'm going to look for a magic bullet over here.
Yeah.
And the work I'm often doing with clients is on some level. Right. So the daily behavior of legacy building looks small, looks almost silly if we're taking into account the idea of a wiggle. Maybe not even almost. Truly silly.
Mm-hmm.
And what if that's how we build a life?
Yeah. I think you nailed it with it's the simple, not easy cut part of this. There's the simplicity here to how, like in my world, one might get out of their way, and in your world, how we may start to learn to communicate more effectively with ourselves, but we can't possibly scale something we don't put value in. And that's what I just heard there. It's like that's it. Like, if we
I'm feeling
value
quite
it,
moved as you
it.
say this, and a bit sort of heartbroken, because yes, I think one of the ways the big we get in our way is that we see a doable, slightly mischievous, tiny move we could make on a daily basis, and we think that's not enough.
Yeah, and that's I think that's what we're doing with the show. I think that's what we're doing with the show. But for me, when I think about where we started with this, or this idea of how we may talk to ourselves, how about we take a stab at putting a value on this that people may have never put a value on before? So what I mean by that is help our listeners maybe understand some of the really teeny tiny, so subtle you wouldn't notice it, but really in the grand scheme of things, this thing is actually the reason why sort of thing, reason as to why.
Let me give you one, because I have some science behind it.
Please.
I bring this up in my TED Talk that I just delivered a few weeks ago that isn't even online yet. But so it's really front of mind, and it was one of those moments where I discovered the science after my intuition already told me, and then I was like, oh, how delightful. How delightful that it's true. In a nutshell, let's all take ourselves to the moment when we're about to step on a stage. We're about to press go on that, record button. We're about to be on a podcast. Mm-hmm. And our body has that reaction that bodies have had for millennia, where we get some version of a fight or flight response because of what psychologists would call a social evaluative threat. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is no longer a bear is coming at us, but it is the tribe might see me as wrong, as different, as not worthy, and they will kick me out. And in, the ancient times, and we really still have those same bodies, were we to be kicked out, we'd be quite far away from the fire source, the love. We would die. The social evaluative threat feels like the bear because, of course, on some level, it is a survival response. So what happens when we feel that survival response? Well, we can all feel this in, right? If you're about to go on a stage, you feel the butterflies suddenly turn into the heart beating fast, the shallow breathing, the dry mouth, the sweaty palms. And jumping into the brain science, our blood routed away from our prefrontal cortex to deal with all of the fight or flight. And I argue most of us who are quite savvy have figured out ways to sort of hide this inconvenient body response from our audience. We're still having it, but we're hiding it. And look at us, pat on the back. We can sort of mask. I feel really confident right now, and nothing is weird going on with me. However, the effort it takes to do that masking does something else. It hides us in other ways. So we're not just hiding this inconvenient body response, we're also hiding the nuanced weirdness, let's say, of us. And so an audience might receive instead a slightly flattened version of us. We see this every time we go to a conference. The conference organizer, who knows that it's his or her job not to sort of steal the spotlight, but they nonetheless have to come up on the stage at the beginning and do housekeeping, which is code for I am undervaluing like the spiritual benefit of welcoming a room.
Right.
And they come out and they say, welcome everybody. It's so great to see you all this morning. Hope you got coffee. And they're there, but they're not quite there. And we don't know how to say what it is. And we use the word authentic or inauthentic, but we also are like, well, but how, but what? And it's just somebody who's having a big body response and covering it, but not quite showing up human as a result. This is what happens in the brain, right? The amygdala is freaking out and all of our, rest of our resources are heading towards that big freak out. Here's my aha. When you tell yourself right before you go on stage, instead of, I hope I don't mess up, I hope I don't mess up, I hope I don't mess up, which is a fear response, or a fear mental model, I should say. If instead we think, I can't wait to talk about my favorite thing. I can't wait to love on them. I can't wait to see my friends in the audience. I'm going to focus on what I love about what I'm talking about. I'm going to focus on what I love about this conference. I'm going to focus on that pastry I just had out front and, ask them if they had that. When we focus on love, not fear, intentionally in our own brain, it releases a completely different chemical response. And an MRI machine will show it to you.
Yeah.
Instead of the amygdala freaking out and everything, all the resources heading towards it, oxytocin kicks in, the love hormone, the cuddle hormone. And it literally, there's not supposed to be a easy way for it to get, because of the blood-brain barrier, blah, blah, blah. It's not supposed to be able to get, if you just look at the science originally before people sort of went deeper on this, it's not supposed to be able to get in straight to the amygdala, but it can. But it can. The brain was obviously evolved in order for oxytocin to slide right into the amygdala, warm it all up in a bath of love, and the amygdala chills the fuck out. The difference between I hope I don't fuck up and I want to love on these folks, and it doesn't even have to be love. It can be I want to care about them. I want to be as generous as possible, right? These pro-social thoughts change the conditions inside of our body.
Thank you for your help. Thank you for helping people understand the modern day version of fight or flight. I've heard fight or flight my entire life because I was in sport, I studied it. No one ever wanted to bring it into the here and now. And I love your version of the bear, that the bear is the social value. And this social value, we are putting such a weight on that. My gosh, we're putting so much gravity around that, to where how can we possibly think from a self-centered, for lack of a better term, how can we think from a self-centered perspective when we put in so much weight on everything that is outside of us? And I think for me, listening to you, I literally spoke to a room exactly 24 hours ago as we are recording this. And as we started, the mic was horrendous. The screen that I was using was blinking all the time. And within 2 minutes of me starting and doing my opening, 3 people were about 5 yards away trying to fix all this, which was a huge distraction.
So hard.
And my body was 1,000 degrees underneath. It felt. And I'm like, there's no way that this room cannot see probably how red my entire body must feel right now. Now, lo and behold, you talk about the mask. After I was done, a couple of friends of mine who were in the audience were like, man, you dealt with that so well. I was like, I did? Because in here, I didn't. Not at all. I'm so glad that it came through that I did. But that little encounter that I had yesterday professionally, we're all experiencing that daily in some capacity. We're in a conversation at a coffee shop and three people are talking about something and we don't feel as connected to the topic, but we try to feel as connected to the topic as we can. So we start to shift and manipulate ourselves to satisfying whatever it might be. And we do the same professionally. We're in a meeting and we try to play it off like we know better than we actually do. And suddenly now we've gone down this rabbit hole of a topic and a conversation. Before long, we're saying yes to something that we don't even know what we're saying yes to. All because we're trying to meet that social value that we've decided to put on ourselves or to make a priority for ourselves.
Steve, will you tell us yesterday when this was all happening, did you acknowledge what was happening over there?
Twice. I did. I had to. Like for me, and I think it's a little bit of my Britishness kicking in too. Like sometimes when you grow up in England and sometimes like a spade is a spade and you say it like
you got to say the thing.
What is happening right there is like I'm not going to pretend that that's not happening right now. I was just like,
well, this is a huge lesson, though. I mean, I love that was your answer because there is a certain. I mean, I could put this in two different ways. One is there's a certain power in acknowledging the true thing. But the other, which is a little bit of a meaner way to put it, but just I think this is actually kind of what's at stake. When we don't acknowledge the thing that's happening in a room that we're all experiencing, we break trust with our audience because we're pretending we live in a different reality than they do.
Yeah. Love that.
And we want, and this can extend to also, us having a hard day, us having a stutter, us, right? Anything that's more personal than just like, there's a weird amount of sound going on in the room. But people worry, do I acknowledge the thing? And no one is required to acknowledge anything. Self-disclosure is super personal, and I am not here to, shame anybody. And there is a surprising power move in naming the thing instead of not naming the thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I love the point because it validates a heck of a lot of the work that we actually did in that room. I was blown away by the participation, by the involvement, and who knew maybe at that point I was actually creating a level of trust in the room just through that acknowledgement. And at least now that I know, that's what I'll do in future. That's for sure. But I think
I strongly recommend.
Yes,
I mean, it's almost like you planted those guys there.
Exactly. I'll do it from now on. I'll just take those three people. I'll ask for three people. Like, I need
Could you
the mic
really mess
not
up
to
my
work.
opening?
If we can make the audio terrible, it really helps me. Like it really helps me build trust with this audience.
But I mean, we're joking and we're not, because look, a huge amount of real life, and especially high stakes life, is a reframe. Is the sort of the gamifying of a reframe. Yeah. Life is not going exactly as we want. The geopolitical moment we are in is not going exactly as I'd like. How can we reframe this? Now, not because we're idiots and not because we're, Pollyannas, but because this is the world we're in. What is a reframe that would reignite a sense of play, that would reignite a sense of creativity, that would reignite a wiggle, that would make me come back online as a person with all of my weirdness? Because that's who people want to connect with for the most part.
Yeah, I agree. And it's why I immediately gravitated to even a word like wiggly. I think when you I have no doubt you've done this in rooms. Like when you say, hey, what does wiggly mean to you? Like how do you how do you know that you're in a wiggly state or whatever it might be? I love it, because for me, I think we are so much more playful than we're ever willing to admit and acknowledge, and I think it's in our most playful state that we're actually in our most authentic state.
Yes.
And when we're talking about communication, to bring it back to that for a moment, like, can we get people to that state where they feel as though the communication that they're not only having with the person across from them, but the communication they're having with themselves, they can just lower the stakes a little bit, step into more of a playful mindset, knowing that, and I'm going to come up with the segue of all segues because it's right there on your shoulder, permission to speak. It's going to give them permission to speak. And so here you are someone who's written a book called Permission to Speak. What we are speaking to right now is exactly that. It's how can you know deep down, or how can you build that level of trust with yourself deep down to know that when you need to speak and whatever it is you need to say, you can give yourself the permission to do that. Because when I think about what it means to be growth ready around the way you responded, that for me is an outcome that comes with the approach that you alluded to around understanding this internal battle, if you will, that we have between the body and the mind. Because I would argue one way to define that little internal battle that we deal with is our body's way of saying, I'm trying to decide what I'm giving myself permission to do here. Yeah. So I want you to help us better understand some of this science. Well, you've already done that, but I want you to now help us better understand how someone can get to that point where they say, I feel ready to give myself that permission to speak.
I'm going to quote Simon Sinek, start with why. Right? The different functions of speaking and communicating range based on what you want. Some of the, sort of most audacious advice around giving ourselves permission to speak works in some contexts and not in others. So a good starting place is considering, for each of you listening, and for us who are obviously still, very much in the shall we say, looking for growth opportunities phase of our life, continuing to up level and challenge ourselves, is this question of what is this moment? What's possible in this moment? So if it's, say, giving a TED Talk or giving a speech on a stage at a conference where people are going to be kind of dressed down and sort of unconference vibes, you know what I mean? Like there's a sort of a creative spirit, like disruptive energy. Often, if we don't know what we're going to talk about, let's say a few weeks in advance, and we have 10 minutes, say, a great way to start is to wonder about 3 questions. 1, what do I think that audience really needs? Like in the, language of business, the pain point. What's really keeping them up at night? And maybe it's too broad of an audience to know. But maybe you can do a little more research / imagination work. Maybe there's a little bit of a mini listening tour you can do. I always ask this. I speak at so many different industry conferences, from healthcare to beauty to hospitality to real estate agents. I mean, it's like hilarious to me because, of course, what we're really saying is turns out everybody talks.
Yep.
So I'm invited into all these different industries that are not mine. And that, I have a working understanding of realty, right? We did that house buying thing that one time. Right. But so then I asked, who are some folks that are going to be in the audience that I could maybe do a little mini interview with? And I just ask questions and just try to understand, the real keeping them up thing, the real in this moment for their industry, for them, for growth. What would be really, really meaningful for them? So thing number 1 is, what does my audience need? Thing number 2, what do I have the most fun talking about? I think it is a real fucking business practice to center our own delight and to do it as a strategy, not as a side gig. What lights me up when I talk about it? What's my favorite thing? What's my thing I've been on a real kick about lately? What's my, unpopular opinion? What's my, right? Like I teach a course at, USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism that I built based on my book. And one of the assignments that I give them is an obsession list, like 25 things you're obsessed with. They can be, season 4 of Bridgerton, or they can be cardigan sweaters, which no one really appreciates, or they can be, a specific kind of dog, or it can be something, sort of much more massive and identity defining. But list the things you're obsessed with that either everyone is also obsessed with, or you're pretty sure you're a real fucking weirdo that you're obsessed with. I'm sorry, I keep swearing now that I've started. I can't stop. It's part of my brand, and and it's an exercise in really claiming the ways that we care about things, even if it's small scale to big, and that light us up when we talk about them. Right. So thing number 1, what does our audience need? Thing number 2, what do we love to talk about? And thing number 3 is, what is the biggest swing? What would be the most dangerous thing I could talk about in this space? And we don't have to do it. But the exercise of figuring that out tends to be revealing. And I bring all this up to say, your question was, how do we get better at communicating? How do we focus on communicating? What is the thing? And the answer is partly, what is the context, right? I want to be really, really honest and rigorous and loving about the fact that what I just suggested are for when you have quite an open context. And then we have the margin of error inside our own company, which you know better than I, those of you, who are listening. And you can tell yourself better than I would ever understand what the norms are of that space and how much wiggle room there is outside of those norms.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a lot. And maybe you're not taking advantage of it. And what if you just showed up for that next, sort of semi-boring topic presentation you've been assigned with a little more sense of play and a little more storytelling? And no one quite knows why, but somehow it just seems much more alive and everyone really enjoyed it.
Gosh, I wish I could just get people to understand the importance of context more in my world. Like, it's frightening how much we can hurt ourselves as humans when we don't put enough weight on context around how we both receive things and then decide to, put it back out into the world. Because there's no doubt, I've no doubt that you're experiencing this. I know you work with leaders in how they are maybe putting way too low a value on context, overlooking it and just going straight to the emotional response, the very words that they heard as opposed to what was around those words, that how they received them, etc., and vice versa. Like, what words do I need to consider sharing based on, as you just said here, the audience, and what is it? The other two parts of this around, what is fun for us and what might be the biggest thing that we can share. It's almost just like, well, contextually, it's like if you don't have that context, you really can't answer those second two questions. Sorry, you can't figure out what the biggest, most scariest, most daring thing is you could possibly say without context. Otherwise, it's just a comment. It could be, in your mind, it could just be the greatest, biggest thing ever, but contextually, it may have zero relevance to whatever it is that you're addressing in that moment.
Yeah, well, I would say actually all three of them, because I was going into the weeds on how we figure out what our people need. But if we don't do that work, all three of those are somewhat opaque.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I guess part of me is also putting in a, bid for doing that kind of research/imagination work in advance of any time we get a chance to speak. And the reason I say research/imagination is that those are two different and both valuable ways of putting ourselves into that room before we're in that room. Right? And one way, research is a reminder that whether we use, AI or whether we, open a book, I don't know, or talk to people, that we're not supposed to know everything. We're allowed to not know everything. What we must do is have some curiosity. That is what we must do. I'm putting must with a capital M there, right? So if we're curious, how would we get answers? And then get some until we keep going until we have some sense of clarity. And then the other is imagination, where we really do, how no one rests, and we all know we're supposed to rest. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things to do is to sit out in my hammock in my backyard and not bring my phone out and look up at the trees and think about an issue and just sort of wonder in what we would call in acting school soft brain wonder, which is, I think, just a permission term for don't have to have the answer right away, And if I'm wondering, this audience that I'm about to speak to, I did a little research. I understand that they're worried about XYZ. What would that feel like? Oh, I wonder how that actually is manifesting. I wonder what kind of support they currently have. And maybe that results in a little bit further research and I can get some answers, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it stays in the realm of imagination. And, Steve, you brought this up. We all have so much more resources in our body, in our big imaginative brains, the same resources we had when we were 3. And we're just not always encouraged to use those or name those as resources.
Right.
But often that kind of, one of my favorite quotes is Toni Morrison said, as you enter positions of trust and power, which let's just assume we're all in, as you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think.
Oh, I love that.
Right? Like we can all interpret it differently and we'll have a billion different interpretations. But for me, it's a real reminder, and it's like a central part of my work and what I try to impart to my clients when I'm in an advisorship capacity with them. dream a little before you think. I think thinking here is a stand-in for telling ourselves all the old stories, the cultural stories, the personal stories that just continues to perpetuate the problems we're in. And dreaming is what would be a better story.
Yeah.
But also in terms of building a speech or in terms of thinking through, this sort of practical stuff, dream a little before you think is a reminder that sitting around and wondering, daydreaming, what if we considered that the real work?
And that's you talk about a reframe. I mean, that's a complete reframe. It's getting because you don't have to sell me on this, sister. Like, I'm with you. Like, if anything, I probably need to dial it back a little bit on
I don't know.
The imagination.
But yes, I mean, obviously, this is part of, if we were to gather a bunch of sort of, quote unquote thought leaders, people who really take seriously trying to move a field forward with fresh thoughts, where do the fresh thoughts come from? I mean, this is sort of a rhetorical and sort of a legit question, but I think they come from that open space of surprise. And we must protect those open spaces of surprise. And too few people, I think, tell us that. So I like to offer it.
And I've never, just listened to you here, like I've never thought of permission this way, but my mind immediately just started to go to the level of comfortability that we need to have around, whether it be speaking, whether it be imagination. Like, for me, comfortability comes before the permission. We give ourselves permission for what it is we feel comfortable doing, and the work therefore is in the finding the comfort with it. Because so much to what you're saying is that it goes against how we've been raised in so many ways to be creative, imaginative, when we're supposed to rely on resources and quote the people we reference and all this kind of thing. And it's just like, that's how you're supposed to make your point. And it's like, well, no, you're saying that there's a world where imagination can reign. In fact, imagination can be the catalyst for more relevant, more legitimate research, for instance. And you could even
like per what my sort of anecdote earlier, my intuition said X. The science, it turns out, also says X. That was convenient for me, but in a way, not at all surprising.
No,
because I've seen it with my own eyes.
And that's what I love about. I love that you said that, because for me, that is huge in this. And this is where we now get to bring this all the way back to our bodies and how our bodies speak to us. It's something I've said it to clients until I'm blue in the face, and I've said it on the show a few times. It's our bodies are our greatest voice if we're willing to listen to them. Like, if we don't listen to them, then at a certain point, the body's gonna be like, you know what, I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to check out. And we don't want that to happen.
Such a beautiful line. Our body is our greatest voice.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. But that comfortability in listening to one's body is where the intuition is born. And suddenly now we start to give ourselves that permission is so much to what we're speaking to here.
Let me also introduce another concept that I think we're talking about without saying, which is power. And this embodied feeling of power, which is not the same as, sort of knowing your place in a hierarchical system, but agency, a word that is now used so much to talk about AI. But the body agency, the feeling of I have power too. And in a way, I think permission and power are almost interchangeable. I didn't think about this when I first named the book, but the more I work with clients and the more that my work has inevitably taken me to leadership and then to these larger sort of abstract questions of what is leadership? What should leadership feel like in a better world? These sort of like a leader is not just a person, but it's an energy that walks into a space and wants to do to that space, literally and also, metaphorically in terms of decision making. And then I inevitably, over the years, we were talking right before we press record about our books both being 3 years old. 3 years is enough time for a lot of evolution, right? My ideas have evolved partly through actually working with, real people, with real groups, so many different industries, as we've
So
discussed.
you're telling me you would like to rewrite half of your book too? Is that what you're telling
No,
me right now?
I actually love it. I actually love it. I think it's a real.
Because I
it's
would
a
like to
real-
rewrite part of mine.
That's so funny. I actually got to do a reprint of the book this last December.
Nice. Love that.
And they asked me, my Penguin Random House asked me, they're like, you can't change the page count, so good luck, but would you like to make any internal changes? And I thought about it. I did a little hammock thinking, and I was like, you know what? No, actually, I'm okay. There's a whole new chapter I would write, but if I don't, that's not what we're doing. I actually stand by it.
Yeah.
But my thinking has evolved, and one of the questions I asked myself this year was, why public speaking? I asked myself this when I sold my book before I wrote it as well, by the way. So it's not like it's the first time I've asked, but I think asking the question again leads us to notice the ways in which the answer has evolved. Yeah. And why public speaking? A phrase that kind of turns everybody's body off. But why do I care about a person talking in front of other people? And I think that one of the answers, there's a really, really practical one, which is just like, I want more people who have brilliant ideas to get them out there, right? That's just like, we just need to be the ones who build the world. But the other even bigger part of it, I think, is that I think public speaking is a tell about how we hold power. When we approach our public speaking opportunities from a place of love instead of fear, for example, which is practice. It's a practice. Mm-hmm. We are actually saying, I am choosing to turn this moment that I have on a stage, metaphorical or literal, into an opportunity to flex my power. What kind of power do I want to hold in the world? What do I want it to do? How do I want it to make people feel? How do I want it to build the world a little differently? Public speaking is the tell, in the same way that you just said our bodies, in a way, are the tell, right? When people talk, we hear them. We hear how much they're hiding. We hear how much they're showing up. We don't always know how to, sort of talk about it. But that's why this term authentic gets thrown around so much. We can feel when someone's really showing the fuck up, and we can feel when they're not. We don't always know why they're not. But I'm so intrigued by that, and especially in this AI era. What are the things that are so deeply human that AI won't be taking it from us anytime soon? And it is how our bodies and our faces and our voices and our ideas show up in front of other people. And then what happens next? And do those ideas spread? Or do they get stuck?
It's funny, you actually just answered. I had one question left, and it was pertaining to a lot of the work that I do, and to kind of plug in so much of what you're talking to through this lens, because a lot of what I'm always speaking to with clients and audiences is how do we go from what we know and building ownership around it, so it's no longer simply something we know, but it's something we actually own. And you really just answered that question through that last bit, because for me, I think we all know to an extent what you just informed us, but the ownership piece comes down to asking better questions, such as what kind, and I wrote it down, that's why I'm looking down here, what kind of power do I want to hold in the world? That is a transitional question to go from knowing you have something to say to owning that you have something to say. And once someone owns it, the value is where it needs to be. And 99 times out of 100, someone's going to do something about that. They're going to follow through.
And let me make it even more practical, because, right, I'm so with you. And sometimes this can feel big. Yeah. I ask folks all the time, and not even my leaders. Like when I do stuff with high schoolers and college, right? Like obviously sort of at every level. And particularly I'm very interested in the Gen Zers, because of course they are the ones who are looking at this world going, what would I like to do better? And how do I do it with less bullshit? Mm-hmm. And what a delightful place to, sort of plug into their lives. And then the question is, what kind of leaders do you like in the world right now? Let's define leaders really broadly, right? They can be artists. They can be people holding power in some way in our cultural power. What kind of leadership really lights you up? What kind of leadership do you wish there was more of in the world? And how do you be that? And then we have to think through, what do I like? What are the traits of the leaders I like? And then we actually get back in a, sort of fun way for me to some of the really, really basics of voice. Do they swear? Do they say and ah? Well, then in that case, maybe that's fine. Do they have a sense of humor when they talk? Do they stay all on one note so that everything that they say sounds like they are a bit of a robot? Or is there a real range and they go up and they go down? And do we now think up and down might be okay and not sort of clownish? Like what, let's actually interrogate our assumptions about what a powerful person is supposed to sound like, which is a story all of us have received from all kinds of sources our entire lives. The story of what power is supposed to sound like or has traditionally sounded like. And then we get to go, is that working? What about those other leaders that we really enjoy listening to? Are they following those rules? If not, is that a standard from a different time that we have outgrown? Are we holding ourselves to that standard? How much is professionalism, quote unquote, as defined orally, not just,
right.
The sort of like what clothes to wear and how to stand, but how to speak? How much of this idea of professionalism ties into an old model of how leadership is supposed to sound that matches leaders I don't like? Okay, what about the alternative? If we make a list of people who really light us up when we listen to them speak, it can be podcasters, right? It can be TED Talkers. It can be artists. It can be award show, recipients whose speeches just clearly steal the night. It can be political. It can be activists or, movement folks. It can be what am I leaving out? Athletes. I mean, that entire, Olympic experience that we all just lived through. The press conferences got a lot of attention for people really showing up and really saying true things. When we start to notice who we really like, how they show up, a completely different model for the sound of power emerges. And then, as we discussed earlier, context matters. What elements of that could you possibly bring into your own world? And also knowing your audience, as I don't, but also as I'm using my imagination.
Right.
Y'all are in a position to change what power sounds like right where you are.
Yeah.
And who are you modeling for? Right? I said start with why. Also start with who. The other major part of our speaking engagements that make us light up and come alive and seem exciting and charismatic and that afterwards everyone, jumps to their feet is when we just remember our who. I am showing up this way for that person in the back of the audience who's just hoping to see something really true today. I'm showing up for me 10 years ago who dreamed of this moment. I'm showing up for my kid. I'm showing up for my mentor who always told me I could take the stage like this and hold power like that, right? Like the who is the kind of mental, choices we get to make that invite us to show up differently. And that is what permission feels like in the body, when we show up differently and we show up like we deserve to be there. And the version of us that's weird deserves to be there. And, then we change the world.
And then we change the world. Yeah, just drop that little mic drop there at the end, which we're all about. I mean, my book's called Shock the World, so let's just change the world while we're at it. But what you've got me thinking about, and I want to make sure that the listeners think about this too, is that where we started today, when I asked you what it means to be growth ready, so much of what you spoke to, you alluded to it as like a warm-up, as a pregame. And what you're talking to here and what you helped us understand is that for us to go public with who we are at our best, these warm-ups, this work that is a warm-up in so many ways, is what will determine the longevity and the lasting effect that we can have. So if we see it as necessary work to preemptively set us up to then go on and do what it is we are capable of doing, communication, how we talk to ourselves internally before we enter that room, before we even engage with another person, before we potentially consider that new client, before we go into that important board meeting, before we go onto that stage, whatever it might be, we are stopping for just a moment. We're doing some of that work that has become habitual, routine, because we respect and we appreciate the work so much and we're seeing the results of the work so much. So why would we ever ever step past our warm-up before going into whatever performance, whatever world it is we operate in. That's
I like
the
to
work.
say, that's the work. I like to say, if you skip your warm up, the only person you're sabotaging is you and everybody you're talking to.
Right? That's it. Everyone loses. Everyone loses. Everyone's left with less. Let's put it that way. I don't
Everyone's
put it
left
in
with
lose
less.
and win.
No,
But
that's
you're
absolutely it.
never gonna get optimal. We're all about optimal on this show. And so for me, if we're not respecting the importance of the warm up, optimal really is never going to be an option. So for us to look at it that way,
And one of, I think, the most heartbreaking feelings, because it's less extreme than the ones that we can label easily.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most heartbreaking feelings is missed opportunity.
right?
And that's, I think, when you leave everybody with just a little less,
Mm-hmm.
and your ideas just don't quite travel, and you go to bed that night and you're like, ugh.
Yeah. So we're not giving ourselves permission to speak in order to simply grow, but to actually capitalize on opportunity, to optimize every opportunity that we have put right in front of us. Samara, this has been a delight. I adore you. I adore this conversation. The value of insight is off the charts, because I think this is a topic we've never really touched on in this way before. And I think the way you've brought it to our listeners, you've given them so much food for thought, and even a couple of exercises they can take away too, which I always appreciate as little bonus points. But before I let you go, where can we learn more about you, and also any ideas on when this TEDx talk's coming out? Because I'm going to want to check it out. So.
Thank you. I know, same. It's in the hands of, as I've been calling it, uppercase TED.
There you go.
But I will say this: just go to permissioninc.co. It's my website, and it's the second that it's up, it'll be posted there. If you go there now and scroll to the bottom, right, you can get on my newsletter. I call them permissionaries, the people on my newsletter, and I think the TED is going to be powerful. I am putting this out there into the world. I think it's going to be powerful. I really dared myself to answer those 3 questions. What do they need? What would be the most fun for me? And what's the biggest, most dangerous swing? And I really tried to do that, and do it in 12 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
A delightful tour de force experience for a public speaking coach.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to see that. And make sure you go check out all the information that we're going to make available on the show notes as well. But Samara,
yeah, I mean, of course, also folks can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, right? I would love to connect.
100%. Samara, this has been a delight. I'm so appreciative of the time. You are welcome back anytime. And this was such a pleasure. And just best of luck with the TEDx and everything that's coming out this year and beyond. So thank you again.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.